It was 6:30 a.m., June 6, 1944. On Omaha Beach, Normandy, Obergefreiter Franz Gockel squinted through the observation port of bunker WN-62. In the half-light before dawn, he glimpsed a sight that chilled his blood. The English Channel had ceased to be water. It was a metal tapestry of vessels, hundreds, even thousands. Landing boats, destroyers, and battleships extended to the skyline everywhere he looked. His palms shook while clutching the grips of his MG42 machine gun. This firearm was a marvel of German design. Its firing speed, 1,200 rounds per minute. It was accurate to 1,000 meters, the quickest machine gun on Earth. For 18 months, Franz had prepared for this very instant. He understood each part of this bunker, all its firing arcs, each deadly area on the sands beneath. Yet, observing the fleet's advance, a single idea gripped him. How can one stop the sea with a machine gun? WN-62 was just one of 15 reinforced posts that guarded Omaha Beach. Constructed in the bluffs 40 meters over the water, it offered an ideal perspective of the whole 7-kilometer invasion area. The shelter's sides were 2 meters of strengthened concrete made to endure square impacts from 16-inch warship cannons. Within, Franz and his 30-soldier unit had amassed 50,000 rounds of ammunition, 200 hand grenades, 12 Panzerfaust anti-tank rockets, plus sufficient food and water for 72 hours of non-stop battle. Their directives were savagely straightforward. Defend the shore, no matter the price. Slay each American trooper who tries to come ashore. No falling back, no giving up. Franz inspected his MG42 a last time. This firearm was 11.5 kilograms empty. It took 50-round belts, replaceable in 5 seconds precisely. Its barrel was exchangeable in 6 seconds once it got too hot, and it would get too hot many times in prolonged fighting. German designers had created the MG42 as the supreme defensive tool. During trials at Kommersdorf Proving Grounds, one gun team repelled mock assaults from whole companies. The firing speed was so quick, 20 rounds per second, that separate shots merged into an unbroken din, like ripping fabric. U.S. troopers would eventually name it Hitler's buzzsaw. Franz had shot 10,000 training rounds while preparing. He knew its habits well. Its tendency to drift left after 200 shots from a hot barrel, the bipod requiring tweaks every 500 shots, how to fix a double feed stoppage in 3 seconds by feel alone. Beside him, his loader, Gefreiter Klaus Zimmermann, piled ammo belts in exact lines. Every belt held 50 rounds of 7.92 57mm Mauser cartridges. They had 1,000 belts prepared, 50,000 rounds in all, sufficient for 41 minutes of non-stop firing at full speed. At 6:15 a.m., Oberleutnant Bernhard Ferking, the post's officer, issued the command. Load weapons. Prepare for contact. Shoot only when I order. Make each bullet matter. Franz drew back the cocking lever, the initial cartridge seated with a metal snap that resounded in the concrete room. Via the viewing port, the initial group of landing boats was 2,000 meters offshore. He could spot the white froth from their trails in the dim morning light. The fight for Omaha Beach was poised to start. 6:30 a.m. The initial U.S. landing boat reached the shore. Franz observed via his sight as its ramp fell. Troops streamed forth into water up to their chests, fighting the tide. They were 800 meters distant, easily inside his range. Every soldier bore 30 kilograms of gear, rifle, ammo, grenades, food, digging tool. Oberleutnant Ferking lifted his hand, paused. The Americans pushed ahead, advancing like slow motion in the waves, burdened by their equipment. 600 meters. Ferking's hand fell. Fewer! Franz depressed the trigger. The MG42 roared. 200 rounds per minute, 20 projectiles each second. The noise was ear-splitting, even within the concrete shelter, a steady metallic shriek that overwhelmed all else. Through his sight, Franz watched the sea beside the Americans explode in white plumes. Soldiers dropped. A few vanished under the water. Others crept to the shore, making red streaks in the foam. Yet they continued advancing. More landing boats reached the shore, LCVP vessels, everyone holding 36 soldiers. Franz tallied 8 vessels in the initial assault, 288 troops, then 12 additional boats, an extra 432 troops, then 20 vessels, 720 additional Americans. He shot in quick bursts, 50 shots, new belt, 50 extra shots, new belt. Klaus supplied ammo with robotic accuracy, his palms working by rote amid the pandemonium. Following 15 minutes of non-stop shooting, Franz had used 18 belts, 900 rounds. Its barrel shone a bright, hot red. Klaus touched his shoulder. "Barrel change!" Franz undid the barrel latch. Klaus wore asbestos mitts to yank the hot pipe out and ram a new one home. 6 seconds. They were fighting once more. By 7 a.m., Franz had shot 2,400 rounds, 48 ammo belts. Yet the shore beneath was crowding with Americans, not scores, hundreds. They found shelter behind shore barriers in bomb holes, behind the corpses of their fallen friends, and additional vessels kept arriving. Franz's hands felt dead from the shaking. His ears whined regardless of the cotton plugs. The shelter reeked of powder and burnt steel. Yet he continued shooting. For what other choice had he? 7:15 a.m., Franz had shot 3,600 rounds, 72 ammo belts, 3 barrel swaps. And then he noticed a thing that altered all. Past the landing boats, huge gray forms appeared in the haze. U.S. destroyers, USS McCook, USS Carmack, USS Doyle. Every ship displacing 2,100 tons, each carrying 4 5-inch warship cannons. Franz observed, horrified, as the destroyers pivoted sideways. At 7:20 a.m., they began shooting. The initial barrage shrieked above like cargo trains. 5-inch projectiles, each one 25 kilograms, each moving at 800 meters per second. The blasts on the bluffs overhead rattled the shelter like a tremor. But the warships were not shooting from far away. They were drawing nearer. 1,000 meters offshore, 800 meters, 600 meters. Near enough for Franz to spot single sailors on the decks. The Americans were attempting what the German High Command had called unfeasible. They were maneuvering major warships into low water to offer direct covering fire. Every destroyer could shoot 15 rounds per minute from each gun. 4 guns per vessel. 3 vessels. That meant 180 shells per minute pouring onto the German posts. Franz calculated quickly in his mind. His MG42 shot 1 to 200 rounds per minute. Remarkable. Frightening to foot soldiers. But those warships were hurling 4,500 kilograms of high explosive each minute at the shelters. It was no contest. At 7:35 a.m., bunker WN61, 200 meters to Franz's left, sustained a square hit. The blast was so huge that Franz sensed the concussion through 2 meters of concrete. As the smoke dissipated, the shelter had vanished. Only a hole full of bent metal and debris. Oberleutnant Ferking's voice broke on the field telephone. "All posts maintain fire. Don't allow them to secure a beachhead." Franz depressed the trigger once more. But his hands trembled now, not from the guns rattling, from the awareness that was moving through his thoughts like cold water. The Americans were not just disembarking soldiers. They were disembarking a whole industrial country. Each vessel he could spot stood for thousands of tons of steel, millions of labor hours in plants, a manufacturing ability that Germany just could not equal. He possessed the finest machine gun on Earth, but they possessed the sea full of vessels. 10:15 a.m., 4 hours into the fight. Franz had swapped barrels 8 times, shot 12,000 rounds, 240 ammo belts. His shoulders hurt from the kickback. His trigger finger was seizing up. The shelter was dense with smoke, ignoring the airflow system. Klaus passed him one more belt, his 241st. Franz fed it in by rote, his motions ingrained after thousands of cycles. And then he glimpsed a sight that made his gut clench. U.S. troops had gotten to the seawall, not just a few. Hundreds of them. They were employing Bangalore torpedoes, long pipes filled with 10 kilograms of charges to blast holes in the barbed wire. Engineers using flamethrowers were purging shelters. Demolition squads were advancing methodically up the cliffs. But what frightened Franz worst was what he noted past them. More vessels, constantly more vessels, LCVPs, LCIs, LCTs. Landing boats of all dimensions and kinds, creating a ceaseless conveyor belt from vessel to beach, every wave delivering more soldiers, more ammo, more gear. At 10:30 a.m., Franz saw an LCM beach itself. The ramp fell, and a Sherman tank drove off. Then one more, then one more. 5 tanks from a single landing boat. Franz seized the Panzerfaust from its holder. 1 rocket, usable distance. 60 meters, armor-piercing, 200 millimeters, sufficient to destroy a Sherman, but 5 tanks were on the shore now, and more landing boats were arriving. How many Panzerfausts did they possess? 12. 12 rockets versus a force that could deploy 5 tanks every few minutes. The arithmetic of failure was getting too hard to overlook. At 10:45 a.m., the field telephone buzzed. Oberleutnant Frerking's voice was tense. WN-62, this is command. U.S. infantry has broken the wire at map coordinate 472. Shift fire to... The line cut out, severed by shelling or captured. Franz wasn't sure which. He glanced at Klaus. Klaus glanced back. No talking was needed. They were isolated now. No commands, no support. No chance of rescue. Franz faced his MG42 again. He possessed 28 ammo belts remaining. 1,400 rounds. At his present firing speed, that meant 7 minutes of ammo. He squeezed the trigger once more, for what other option was there? The Americans continued advancing. 11:20 a.m., Franz's ammo was getting extremely low. 15 belts left, 750 rounds. Klaus was perusing a letter. Franz had watched him retrieve it from his pocket during the prior barrel swap. It was from Maria, Klaus's wife. Franz knew this, as Klaus had shared portions of it out loud on calm nights before the landing. She says young Hans took his first steps last week. Klaus had spoken, his voice heavy with feeling. She says he looks exactly like me. Now Klaus folded the message neatly and put it back in his chest pocket. His hands were firm. His expression was placid. He glanced at Franz and nodded a single time. Both of them understood they would not exit this shelter living. In the corner, Gefreiter Otto Schneider was hurt. Fragments from a close call had ripped into his left leg. He had bandaged it with a field dressing and leaned himself on the wall, continuing to fill magazines for the spare rifles. His face was pale from blood loss, yet his hands kept working. "My father battled at Verdun," Otto said abruptly, his voice far away. He described the French assaults, wave upon wave. They kept advancing regardless of how many we slew. He said the one thing worse than combat was realizing you were in combat for no reason. Franz did not reply. What was there to say? Via the viewing port, he saw U.S. combat engineers setting explosive charges on bunker WN-60. The blast threw a column of smoke 50 meters high. One more post lost. Oberleutnant Frerking materialized in the opening, his uniform ripped and bloody. "Gockel, Zimmerman, Schneider, the Americans have breached our lines on both sides. We're encircled." "I am directing you to..." A huge blast interrupted him. The shelter trembled. Debris fell from the roof. When Franz's sight returned, Frerking was on the floor, blood spreading under him. Klaus went to assist, but Frerking gestured him away. "Conserve your energy," he wheezed. "They will arrive shortly. When they get here..." He hacked, blood on his mouth. "When they get here, give up." "That is an order. You have performed your duty. Inform them." "Inform them we battled bravely." He expired before he could speak another word. Franz glanced at his MG42. 12 belts remaining. 600 rounds. Perhaps 3 minutes of shooting time. Outside, he could make out American voices, English phrases he couldn't comprehend. They were near now. Very near. 11:55 a.m. The shelter door blew inwards. Franz let go of the MG42 and lifted his hands. Klaus did likewise. Otto was unable to stand, so he just lifted his arms from his spot against the wall. U.S. troops streamed in, weapons aimed. "Hands up! Hände hoch!" They were yelling in fractured German, their faces covered with grit and blood, their eyes frantic with adrenaline. A sergeant, Franz could spot the rank on his helmet, advanced. He was youthful, perhaps 23 years of age. His hands were trembling as he aimed his M1 Garand at Franz's torso. "Clear!" a person yelled from the rear. "3 captives, 1 KIA." The sergeant dropped his weapon slightly. He glanced at Otto's leg injury, then yelled commands. "Medic! Get a medic in here!" In moments, a U.S. medic was crouching by Otto, slicing off the blood-drenched bandage. He operated fast, expertly, putting on sulfur powder and a clean dressing. He said nothing. He had no need. The meaning was obvious. You are hurt. You are a captive. But you will not perish. Not this day. Franz was frisked harshly, his handgun taken, his paybook seized, his pockets cleared. The Americans discovered Klaus's letter from Maria. A trooper began to toss it aside, but the sergeant halted him. "Return it," he said. "It is only a letter." Klaus received the letter with shaking hands and put it back in his pocket. They were escorted outdoors under guard. Franz squinted in the brilliant noon sunlight. The shore beneath was beyond recognition. Where empty sand had been at sunrise, there was now a supply center. Hundreds of trucks, hills of material, medical tents with red crosses on white fabric, engineers carving roads up the cliffs, radio vehicles, command centers, fuel depots, and the vessels. God, the vessels. The sea was still dense with ships. LSTs were grounding themselves, lowering ramps, unloading trucks and cannons and additional tanks. Many of them, mobs of them. Franz ceased walking. The U.S. sentry behind him pushed him onward, but Franz hardly felt it. He was gazing at the shore, calculating the figures in his mind. Every LST could hold 20 Sherman tanks. He tallied 15 LSTs on the shore at that moment. That meant 300 tanks. And more vessels were arriving. The armada extended to the skyline. His MG42 had shot 12,000 rounds that morning. He had slain. How many? Scores? Perhaps 100 Americans? And they had disembarked 30,000 soldiers on this shore alone, with 300 tanks, and sufficient ammo to battle for weeks. The arithmetic of failure was not just obvious. It was crushing. Franz and the other captives were guided to a provisional POW enclosure, merely barbed wire and wood stakes quickly built in a field 500 meters from the shore. There were 200 German captives within already. More were coming every few minutes. A U.S. lieutenant strode by the wire, clipboard in hand, tallying captives. He appeared drained, but pleased. 247, Franz overheard him tell another officer. And it is not even 1 p.m. yet. Franz sat on the dirt beside Klaus. Neither talked. What could be said? But Franz could not cease thinking, could not cease computing. His MG42 was built at the Mauser plant in Oberndorf, Germany's best arms factory, manufacturing output. 1,000 MG42s each month. It required 150 labor hours to make one gun. Exact machining, expert artisans. Quality checks at each step. The Americans were employing M1 Garands. Franz had spotted hundreds of them, thousands. Each and every U.S. trooper had one. He had heard the intelligence briefings. The Springfield Armory in Massachusetts made 4,000 Garands each day. Each day. Not each month. Each day. And that was only one plant. The Americans possessed dozens of arms plants, hundreds of factories making ammo, trucks, planes, vessels. While Franz was in this shelter with 50,000 rounds, U.S. factories had made 10 million rounds. While his unit of 30 soldiers had defended this post, U.S. shipyards had floated 3 Liberty ships, everyone able to haul 10,000 tons of freight. The figures were crazy, unbelievable. And still, here was the evidence. laid out on Omaha Beach like a listing of U.S. industrial power. A sentry offered water. Franz drank by rote. The water was pure, cool, from a U.S. canteen. Even their water had the flavor of plenty. Klaus at last spoke. My father was employed at the Krupp plant in Essen. He often said Germany possessed the top engineers on Earth, the top steel, the top weapons. Franz nodded. It was factual. The MG42 was better than any U.S. machine gun. German tanks were more armored, more armed. German planes were quicker, more agile. But they possess more, Klaus went on, his voice empty. They simply possess more of all things. Franz gazed at the shore again, at the ceaseless flow of vessels, at the hills of material getting taller each hour. It is not a war, Franz said softly. It is a factory, and we are battling a factory with rifles. Klaus did not reply. He had no need. They both comprehended now. This was not a fight. It was arithmetic, and arithmetic had no concern for bravery or preparation or better design. Arithmetic only valued figures, and America possessed all the figures. June 7th, 1944. 24 hours past the landing. Franz Gockel sat in the POW enclosure, seeing U.S. trucks drive inland. Every truck hauled 2.5 tons of material. He tallied 50 trucks in a single convoy, 125 tons, then one more convoy, then one more. The Americans had disembarked 156,000 soldiers on D-Day. They had delivered 20,000 vehicles, 2,500 tanks. They had shot 7 million rounds of ammo in the initial 24 hours. Franz had shot 12,000 rounds. His whole unit had perhaps 200,000 rounds in all. The arithmetic was savage. For each bullet Germany could make, America made 100. For each tank, 10. For each vessel, 50. A U.S. officer strode past the enclosure. He was consuming something from a metal can. Peaches. Franz could smell them. The officer completed it, threw the used can away, and continued walking. Nonchalant, squandering, plentiful. That metal can informed Franz all he had to understand about this war. America had the means to send peaches over an ocean. They had the means to discard food. They had the means to disembark 156,000 soldiers on a shore and lose 2,000 of them and deem it tolerable losses, as they possessed 10 million additional soldiers in reserve. Germany had no means for any of it. Klaus was sleeping, his head leaning on the fence post, Maria's letter still in his pocket. Otto was in a U.S. field hospital, his leg getting care from U.S. doctors with U.S. medicine. They would endure this war. Franz understood that now. They would return home at some point, see their relatives, remake their lives. But Germany? Germany had forfeited this war the instant the first U.S. plant began operating 3 shifts. The instant the first Liberty ship moved down the slipway. The instant U.S. women began laboring in ordnance plants. Franz had been battling troops on Omaha Beach, but the true foe was 5,000 kilometers distant, in Detroit and Pittsburgh and Gary, Indiana. In the plants that never rested. In the shipyards that floated a new ship each day. In the industrial engine that could just outmake, outconstruct, and outlive anything Germany could deploy. Obergefreiter Franz Gockel possessed the finest machine gun on Earth. America possessed the finest factories on Earth. And in the conclusion, factories defeat machine guns, every single time.